Hello, this is Kristen Dombrowski. Welcome to your Module 4 introduction video. In this module, we will take a close look at special considerations for our diverse student populations. Chapter 8 in Steps to Success focuses on the literacy needs of English learners. It's estimated that 1 in 5 students is multilingual or an English learner, and this is a demographic of students that we simply cannot ignore. Furthermore, even if you feel that you don't have strong English learner needs in your classroom, I know that you have students that will benefit from the best practices we will learn in this module. The chapter begins with a discussion of the various terms and acronyms used to describe the population of students that are learning English. In my experience and in my position, we use the term English learner, EL, not English language learner, or ELL, for the student, and then ESL, English as a second language, to refer to the department and staff that support these students. And this language is largely dictated by WIDA, WIDA, which is a UW-Madison-based educational consortium. So if they start changing their language or legislation dictates, then we would change our language as well. Feel free to insert your own acronyms from your own teaching position while you're listening to me talk, and recognize that as we learn more about how words impact thoughts and feelings and behaviors, we modify our terms to honor our students and their lived experiences. Throughout Chapter 8, Munger shows us that it is important to understand the needs and experiences of our English learners so that we can develop culturally responsive teaching practices that meet their needs. We view each child as a unique individual and get to know how their culture, their language, and their background experiences have shaped who they are as a learner. At minimum, we need to understand the linguistic needs of our students. Supporting the student's native language is obviously a gold standard and best practice, but not always feasible or realistic based on the structural limitations of whatever school district you're in. So Munger reminds us not to lump all English learners together in a group because our EL students have diverse backgrounds, abilities, and needs. Our students bring with them a wide range of prior knowledge and experiences and literacy experiences. Furthermore, our students will develop language skills at different speeds. So the asset-based view of language helps us to understand that it is often much easier for a student to learn to read in English when they already are literate in their primary language. That's because our students can transfer language and reading strategies as well as background knowledge from their first literacy experience to the next. Sometimes you might hear a colleague complaining or confused why a student is considered an English learner when obviously their English is so good, or that they don't understand why he or she needs services because they've heard them talking to their peers and their English is awesome. What we might need to remind our colleagues of is this difference between BICS, which stands for Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills, and CALP, Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency. When a student has mastered BICS, they seem to be proficient in casual spoken English about topics such as everyday events. They're likely relying on a lot of visual and contextual clues to help them learn and navigate social language. On the other hand, the same student may struggle with academic language and writing and comprehending school subjects and school content. This kind of academic language encompasses everything from the words we use to the order in which we use them. We often speak in short bursts or strings of words as opposed to like the carefully constructed complete sentences with introductory clauses and compound phrases that we expect from written English. Noticing the difference between these two is paramount to understanding how our students learn CALP. Consider the test question on this slide. Think of some Tier 2 vocabulary words that we don't use in our everyday language, such as arrange and explain and time order and cause and effect. Would you hear these words on the playground or at the grocery store? What facial expressions or visuals would help a student answer this question? None, because it's academic and they don't rely on the social context to figure out it's not Bix, nothing's helping them here. So there's so much more to unpack here than just the skill being asked. I'm going to put this up here and you can pause the screen if you've never seen the cultural iceberg before, but I think it's a really good visual for understanding the things that we see versus the other components that make up a student's culture that we do not see or think about. So the question becomes, what can we do to support our learners, our English learners? Some tried and true teaching strategies, which should sound familiar, include introducing key terms before a lesson, so front loading, utilizing pictures with new vocabulary words, and assessing and augmenting background knowledge prior to reading. The chart I made for this slide shows the 5 developmental stages of learning a language, from pre-production to advanced fluency, along with some key instructional strategies to support learners in this stage. So at pre-production, where students are, this could last 30 seconds to 6 months, depending on the student's emotional state, but that's where we're just sitting and listening and watching and not trying to produce any language. One of the best techniques here is total physical response, which you will read about in this chapter, acting it out, putting in motions, right? In early production, as teachers, it's our tendency to ask open-ended questions, and that's a really great practice. For students who are learning English, it might be more comfortable to ask yes or no questions and to state your question, but then rephrase it with simpler vocabulary. At the speech emergent stage, we're super proud that they're taking risks. We want to help by providing them with language models, mentor sentences, and sentence starters. Lots of patterns here, lots of repetition with different types of patterns. I have, who has, he has, she has. Intermediate fluency is where we do want to start pointing out and noticing and comparing some elements of language, such as cognates, false cognates, how sentence structure might be different in various languages. Like, in English we say, oh, my head hurts, but basically the rough translation in Spanish would be, it hurts me, the head. So that's just a unique difference to talk about how that's different. In English we say, I am 12, but in Spanish we would say, I have 12 years. At the advanced fluency stage, we want to focus on academic vocabulary, tier 2 and 3 vocabulary, abstract terms and concepts. At the bottom of this slide are some additional strategies mentioned in this chapter. None of this should sound unique or unfamiliar. You've probably noticed by now that these are just excellent instructional strategies for all students. In fact, you can do no harm by offering these to all of your learners with various needs. That's not to say that it's ever okay to assume that an English learner has special needs. I'm simply saying that our best instructional strategies may serve the needs of many different students at once, and we don't need to group English learners. And a special note for some of my former colleagues out in the world, speaking slower and louder is not on this list. On the same topic of our English learners, we have an excerpt from a guide to the phonics units of study. Even if you do not use this program, Teachers College or Units of Study, or you don't appreciate the views of the author, I do think that this excerpt is well researched and triangulates well with all we know to be best practice for this special population of students. I appreciate Lucy Calkin's approach to the entire Scarborough's rope of reading. She considers all the literacy needs of a student from phonics through comprehension, as opposed to our tendency to just try to fix their phonics and fix their vocabulary. We need to address the entire Scarborough's rope. Past practice had been to remove an English learner until they were fixed and primed to return to the classroom and learn alongside their peers. We now know this is ridiculous and even harmful, and it comes at the expense of our students being exposed to rich grade level text and peer modeling and challenging thinking opportunities. So this is a short but powerful and impactful read with lots of great ways to reframe your thinking and plan for responsive and meaningful instruction. Next, Chapter 9 in Munger's text addresses special learning considerations for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. As with any subpopulation or demographic of students, it's incredibly important that we see each child as a unique individual with varied backgrounds, skills, and interests. This chapter has an excellent asset-based and inclusive outlook in discussing our students with special needs. The most important message I get from this chapter is that we must presume competence in our students. There are several unfortunate and historical assumptions that we must actively reject in our thinking and our planning. First and foremost, never put a ceiling on a child's potential. Often, students with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities are placed in functional literacy classes that give them access to basic sight words that they would need for functional living, like calendars and environmental signs. All students deserve access to rich and varied literacy instruction that goes beyond just simple letter ID and sight words. Students of all needs and abilities need time to experience hearing and responding to good literature, to play with language, and to take risks with new ideas and conventions. All students deserve access to quality literature, student discussion, active participation. When a student does poorly on an assessment of comprehension, we often assume that means they didn't comprehend the text. Perhaps the truth is actually that they did understand the text, but we haven't found the best way to access their thinking yet. When talking about inclusion and specially designed instruction, I like to quote the work of Norman Kunk, who has written several excellent books on inclusion. There's a great YouTube video called The Right to be Disabled, where you can hear Norman talk about the very moment that he realized that problems do not lie in our students, our people with disabilities, but rather in the architecture of our system. When a person in a wheelchair cannot access a building, it's not their fault or their problem, but rather it's the building's fault for not being accessible. This chapter also has great ideas for activities and instruction through all 5 strands of reading, from phonemic awareness through to comprehension. They have suggested modifications for various learning needs, such as short-term memory concerns, students with complicated communication needs, students with movement difficulties, and students who have not yet shown metacognitive abilities. I'm certain you will find some inspiring and useful instructional strategies in this chapter that you can use with your students. As far as assignments for this module, of course you will complete your writer's notebook or your teacher's diary, cataloging your learning and connections and responding to the 4 prompts. This will not be graded for this module, but it's always important to complete it as an artifact for yourself. For our discussion post this week, I'm asking you to post 1 or more of your belief statement drafts for your final philosophy of literacy statement. So you're not posting the whole thing, just a section. You can choose from instruction, assessment, language and comprehension, foundational skills, equity and diverse learners, or engagement. Be sure to include citations, especially since we've enjoyed so many different literacy resources through this and actually through all of your UWSP coursework, which is up for grabs in this assignment. As always, you'll come back and post 2 peer responses with a focus on helping each other to revise and expand your thinking. Just a heads up, your philosophy statement will be due in the next module, so please use this opportunity to polish it up as much as you can. This will ultimately be an artifact for your portfolio, and you'll want this to be as thorough and thoughtful as possible. So you'll also add to your philosophy of literacy statement graphic organizer. In this module, we learned about special considerations for diverse populations, so please jot your ideas as they pertain to this topic. Your professional growth plan is due for this module, so please turn that in on Canvas. And finally, your article summary assignment is also due in this module. That's it for this Module 4 video, and have a great week. Great Module, 3 weeks.